The Broncos allowed you to put up 5 yards per attempt to opposing running backs last year. That's insane. You got a player who forces missed tackles at a high rate. You got a defense that does not tackle well. That is a combo for success. Let's talk about 10 players that are about to dominate in week 1 of fantasy football. You have got to find a way to put these players in your lineup. They will go off. The first player we're going to talk about here is let James cook. Let our boy Jimmy cook in the kitchen. My boy's about to be hot in week 1. He faces the Arizona Cardinals, who last year gave up the most points per game to the fantasy running backs. And just across the board, the Cardinals defense was completely cheeks in 2023. They were first in rushing yards allowed per game, 8th in total yards allowed per game, 2nd in total points given up per game, and they were 5th in yards per attempt allowed to opposing running backs at 4.7. And the Cardinals, yeah, they've improved as a team, but that's offensively. Round 1, they picked up Marvin Harrison Jr., the elite prospect. In round 2, they drafted a defensive tackle who's not even healthy right now. And more importantly, the matchup is juicy, but James Cook became the center of this offense when Joe Brady became the play caller from week 11 onwards last year for the Buffalo Bills. From week 11 onwards, he averaged over 20 touches per game, over 104 total yards per game, and 16 and a half PPR points per game. More importantly, Vegas has the Bills with the second highest implied team point total at 27 on the week. So the expectations from Vegas is that the Bills are going to score the second most points in the NFL this week. I think James Cook is going to have a huge day. 17 plus PPR points in week 1. Book it. All right, that brings us to my spicy, hot, bold take of the week. We'll do this every week on the channel. And my hot take of the week. In his rookie debut here in week 1, Malik Neighbors will have at least 6 receptions, 70 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, at minimum 19 PPR points. In his debut, he's going to start off hot versus those Minnesota Vikings. Last year, the Vikings gave up the 6th most points to fantasy wide receivers, and I think personally their defense got worse. They let go of edge rusher Danielle Hunter, who took a lot of pressure off their secondary last year, and they added Stephon Gilmore. That would have been great 3 years ago. That's not great in 2024. Daniel Jones, look, I get it. He might be as mid as they come, but him and Malik Neighbors are set up to smash with a great matchup. Check this out. The Giants starters played the most preseason action in week 2 versus the Houston Texans. In that game, when the starters played, Malik Neighbors played 30 out of 33 snaps, almost 91%. He had a 33% target share. I would not be shocked if Malik Neighbors has 8 to 10 targets as a rookie in his debut. The volume presents a safe floor, and his immense talent and the matchup presents a really exciting upside. Overall, you got to find a way to put Malik Neighbors in your lineups week 1 as a debut, as a rookie. Straight away, you got to play him. All right. The third player we are playing with a ton of confidence this week. He's going to smash. Kyle Pitts versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This really isn't so much about the matchup itself because Steelers were kind of middle of the pack against tight ends last year. This is less about the matchup, and it's more about the Kirko-Thuggins effect. What do I mean by that? Well, we know Kirk Cousins loves his tight ends. He can't get enough of them. Last year, Kirk was healthy for the first 8 weeks of the season, and those first 8 weeks, TJ Hawkinson was first in targets, 2nd in receptions, 2nd in receiving yards, 2nd in total fantasy points, and 3rd in fantasy points per game. We know that Kirko-Thuggins loves the tight end spot, and now he's got an all-world talent like Kyle Pitts to throw the ball to. I believe the Falcons offense is going to make a statement from day 1 with this whole new coaching staff, new quarterback. Kyle Pitts and Drake London are set to go off. I predict 6 catches for 80 yards and at least 14 PPR points for our boy Kyle Pitts. Where the Pitts truthers at, all right? This is where it all pays off for us, all right? This is our moment. This is how we win. All right, the fourth player that is going to dominate this week, that is Alvin Kamara versus the Carolina Panthers. Panthers were terrible against the run last year. They gave up the 5th most points per game to fantasy running backs. On average, they gave up over 120 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs and offenses. And the Panthers defense, it really only got worse in the offseason. They traded away their best defensive player in Brian Burns to the New York Giants. Then they spent a 1st and 2nd round pick on offensive players. They got a wide receiver and a running back. They did not spend that much time improving their defense. And specifically in PPR leagues, I don't think there's a single lineup that should not have Alvin Kamara this week. From week 4 onwards last year, guys, remember he was suspended for the first 3 weeks. He played from week 4 onwards. In that time span, he was second in targets, first in receptions, fourth in receiving yards, and fourth in fantasy points per game. Guys, Alvin Kamara's 17-game pace last year, 900 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. But look at this, receiving 17-game pace. He was on track to get 112 targets last year, almost 98 receptions. If your wide receiver 1 had 98 receptions last year, you were probably very, very happy. Now, to be clear, in non-PPR leagues, I don't really like Kamara that much. He is a smash given his work through the air. I predict 17 PPR points in this great matchup in week 1. All right, the 5th player that we are playing with confidence. This might surprise some of you, but it's bounce back season for one Christopher Godwin. He plays my Washington Commanders, and as long as the weather holds up, that's something we have to monitor. It might rain in this game, but as long as the weather holds up, I am starting Chris Godwin everywhere. Why? Because I know my Commanders are probably the worst secondary in the entire NFL this year. Last year, they gave up the second most points to fantasy wide receivers. And look, the Commanders definitely improved defensively this offseason, right? They brought in Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell as edge rushers. They brought in Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner as linebackers. They brought in the safety from Carolina. Look, we improved, but we got worse as a secondary. Why? Because we let go of Kendall Fuller in free agency, our only good cornerback, which has made us the worst secondary in the NFL. And that's saying a lot that we're the worst secondary in the NFL, considering last year we gave up the most yards per game in the NFL, the most passing yards per game in the NFL, and the most total points per game to opposing offenses in the NFL. Washington was the only defense to allow over 30 points per game to opposing offenses. I think we've gotten better, but the secondary has not gotten better, and it's a get-right year for Chris Godwin. Last year, they didn't play him in the slot. It made no sense whatsoever, but they are putting him back into the slot, so those sweet slot targets, he'll get all of them, and that's great because he's going to have a high catch rate. He's going to be very efficient with his targets. Now that he's going back into the slot, you see his entire career from 2019 to 2022, he has been so efficient when in the slot. I'm predicting at least 15 PPR points. All right, the 6th player that we are excited to start this week is Jared Goff. I know, all right? Yeah, I could have said Josh Allen, could have said Patrick Mahomes. Who cares? We're talking about trying to, dive in the bag a little bit and find the gem. I think this week that is Jared Goff versus the Los Angeles Rams. He gets to battle his old team on Sunday Night Football this week. A couple reasons I'm all in on Goff in week 1. Number 1, this game versus the Rams has the highest over-under of the week. 51.5 points, 2 high-powered offenses going at it, and the Lions have the highest implied team point total of the week with 27.25 points. Vegas thinks the Lions are going to put up major points. Also, Jared Goff is the dome master. If you look at splits, shout out to U Stadium, when he's in a dome versus outside of a dome, in a dome, he's like MVP caliber form. He has the 5th best rating in the NFL amongst quarterbacks. And look at the weapons he's got to throw the ball to in this dome. Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, Gibbs, Monty Laporta, a top 5 offensive line in the league. He's going to be so protected. He's going to have so many weapons that can dominate after the catch. And the matchup is juicy because the Rams gave up the 3rd most points per game to fantasy quarterbacks in 2023, and they just lost Aaron Donald, one of the best defensive tackles of all time. You got to put Goff in your lineup. I think he could have a sneaky top 6 week in week 1. All right, the 7th player we're excited to play is Ken Walker versus the Denver Broncos. Denver last year was bleeding points to the running back position. They gave up the 2nd most points on a per game basis. They were 3rd in rushing yards allowed per game, 1st in yards per attempt. Guys, the Broncos allowed you to put up 5 yards per attempt to opposing running backs last year. That's insane. And according to PFF, last year, Ken Walker ranked 5th amongst running backs in forced missed tackles per carry, while Denver themselves ranked 2nd amongst defenses in missed tackles rate. Why is that important? You got a player who forces missed tackles at a high rate. You got a defense that does not tackle well. That is a combo for success. And now we get to see this new look offense new offensive coordinator, new head coach. I think Ken Walker's an absolute smash. Last year, he averaged over 17 points per game in a middling offense. I think the offense will be even better. I think he hits around 13 to 16 PPR points in week 1. All right, the 8th player. I am so excited to start this name. Cooper Kupp at the Detroit Lions. We want to get as many names in this game as we possibly can. All right, Detroit last year gave up the fourth most points per game to fantasy wide receivers. And like we mentioned, this game should see a ton of points, 51.5 point over under. I want as many pieces in this matchup as I possibly can. And Cooper Kupp, I get it. He was dealing with injuries all last year, but he was still able to produce even though he was injured. His 17-game pace was 84 receptions, 135 targets, over 1,000 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now, he is fully healthy. What could he do as a fully healthy player again? Remember, guys, we are 1 year removed from back-to-back seasons where Cooper Kupp was a wide receiver 1 in points per game in fantasy football. In 22 and 2021, both years, he was the number 1 wide receiver in points per game. It's a bounce-back season for Chris Godwin. It's also a bounce-back season for Cooper Kupp, and he starts off hot, reminding you guys that he's an elite option, scoring 17 PPR points per game in week 1. All right, the 9th player we're excited to start is Joe Moneybags Mixon at the Indianapolis Colts. He makes his debut as a Texan. It's a divisional game. Last year, the Colts gave up the 4th most points per game to the running back position. They were top 10 rushing yards allowed, total yards allowed, and total points given up per game. And this offense projects to be top 5 in the NFL. A trio of Nico Collins, Diggs, Dell, with CJ Stroud throwing the ball. Mixon, who is going to dominate those red zone touches. Mixon has always dominated red zone touches. Look at what he did last year. He was 2nd in red zone rushing attempt share. So the percentage of attempts given to running backs in the red zone, Joe Mixon was 2nd in the entire NFL. He was 3rd in rushing attempts in the red zone, and he was tied for 2nd amongst running backs for red zone targets. This offense is going to score points. Joe Mixon's going to be the guy in the red zone. He is going to put up points, 16 PPR points, and I predict a trip to the end zone. I think he scores a touchdown in his debut. All right, last one here. Full transparency. Yes, I put this name last in case I was wrong because it is a Friday night game. All right, so this video is probably going to live throughout the week, and I'm not even going to lie to you. I put this name last in case I'm wrong because this is a Friday night game. We're talking Jayden Reed versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I have a lot of confidence in starting him. Of course, anything is possible. Don't forget, guys, last year, Jayden Reed was one of the 10 best wide receivers in fantasy football. From week 10 onwards, he was the definition of a league winner. From week 10 onwards, wide receiver 8 in points per game, averaging 17.4 PPR points. And in week 17, championship week, he was a wide receiver 4 overall with 27 PPR points. Now, clearly, some of that production came without Christian Watson, but we have a rookie wide receiver who produced. Going into his 2nd season, typically those guys are big hits. And now he gets to face the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, who, yes, they've added some rookies, all right, but last year they were terrible. They gave up the most points per game to fantasy wide receivers. I'm sorry, Philadelphia Eagle fans. I know some of you guys are mad at me saying this. You got to prove that you're a better secondary. I think you just have to prove it, just like any other team would. So you added some names, but you're still one of the bottom 10 secondary units in the NFL. I predict Jayden Reed to put up at least 15 PPR points in week 1. I think he's going to have a great game. So those are 10 players that I think are going to absolutely dominate. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you like the content. And the last thing I'll say is if you want weekly rankings that will consistently update, then go ahead and become a Mother Flocker member with the promo code LAND. You'll get my weekly rankings that will consistently update. And if you become a yearly member, I personally will review your fantasy football team. I appreciate you guys for hanging out. Drop a like. I'll see you in the next one. Go win in week 1. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.